All right. So can you take me through your education timeline?
Sure. So I grew up in West Virginia, got my high school degree from there, or diploma, I guess, and then went to Ohio State in 1993, where I started off as a genetics major. I did that for about 2 years, and then decided that was not the field for me, and actually dropped out of school for a couple of years. And a friend of mine in Columbus had graduated, but was a former manager for the football team, and introduced me to Bill Davis, who was the head athletic trainer for Ohio State football at the time. And he's like, I think you'll really like this profession. Go check it out. See what you think. And it was amazing. I really enjoyed it. Bill was awesome. Showed me around the facility and got to hang out at practice. And knew I wanted to go back to school. I was out for about 2 years, but knew that if I stayed in Columbus, then I would just hang out with my friends and probably wouldn't go to class. So transferred to the University of North Carolina. That was in 1997, and started taking classes again and within the athletic training program, and met a young faculty member by the name of Kevin Guskowitz, which many people in our field know him very well. He was a second-year faculty member, but started working in his lab, did an honors project as a senior student, got my degree from there, and then kind of caught the bug of doing research. Continued my master's degree at University of Pittsburgh, which at the time was really up and coming in the concussion space with Mark Lovell and Mickey Collins and the impact test. And then finished off my formal training at the University of Georgia from 2002 to 2006 under Mike Ferrara. So kind of bounced up and down the East Coast a bit, and then took my first faculty job at the University of Illinois in Champaign in 2006. Had really appreciative of all the opportunity I had there as a young faculty member to get started, and then came to Michigan in 2011 and haven't left since. It's been great. Really enjoyed it here.
How did you get into neuroscience specifically? I know that you bounced around kind of human mechanics a bit.
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, Kevin was the one that got me into the concussion space. And I think, to be quite honest, I think if Kevin or whoever that person was, if they had been a diabetes researcher or a Parkinson's researcher or just something else, I probably would be doing that. And I say that not because I don't love what I do. I absolutely love what I do, and I feel super fortunate that I got into an injury, studying an injury before it really became popular, and that's allowed me to do a lot of things. But what I really like is taking very complex problems and breaking them down into manageable chunks and answering those questions and then moving on to the next one. And so, with these complex disease states, I think if that had just been what my advisor did, that's probably what I would be doing. I don't have a personal connection with concussion. Nobody in my family's had one that I'm aware of. So it's more about, for me, it's more about I love the process of research and answering those questions and trying to help people out.
Yeah, definitely. Where does the literature surrounding TBIs and athlete-based concussions stand? I know
I would,
that's a kind of a wide
yeah,
question, and I saw that you have new research published like 4 days ago.
yeah. I
We'll talk
mean,
about that
yeah.
later on.
I'll answer. So I would say, like in the broader context, the entire field is probably still in its infancy. I mean, concussion has been described medically since I think the 5th century BC. And but from there are papers along the way. If we go back, like there's the famous 1928 paper from Harrison Martland around punch drunk, and there's different statements of concussion through the 20th century. But in my mind, I mark the beginning of like concussion science. The modern concussion science is 2007. And that was the time, it was January 18th, 2007. And that was the day that the New York Times had concussion and CTE on the front page. And to me, that's the point it really entered the public consciousness. Like we always knew it was there, but it really entered the public consciousness. And then with that came the grant funding from the NIH and the Department of Defense to study the problem. And if you look at the trajectory of publications, it's a couple of years after 2007 because it takes time for grant funding to be disseminated and the work to be done and then published. But that's when you start to see this upward, really steep upward climb of publications. So we're early in the process. If you were to do a literature search on ACL injuries, it is like 10 or 20-fold the number of concussion papers that are out there. So, and we're talking about injury to the most complex organ in the body. And I have very good colleagues that do ACL work, but it's a hinge joint. It does one thing, it flexes and extends, and they're still trying to figure it out. So we've got a ways to go, I think.
How do you feel like the longitudinal study aspect of the subject matter detracts from the current status of research?
I think there's sort of one feeds into the next, right? So I think the work around what are the acute effects, what is the best way to evaluate and manage somebody with concussion. I think we're more advanced in that space because it was the first thing that we were trying to figure out. When we start talking about long-term effects, that kind of gets to this 2007 time point. And if you back up 2 years, that's in 2005, that's when the first CTE case was published. So I think it is sort of just a natural extension. The long-term effects are a natural extension of what happens on the acute side. But it's a lot more it's a lot harder to do because to do true prospective studies, you have to recruit people and they have to have injuries, and then you have to track them over time to see what happens. And I'm not detracting from the case series work that's been done already. It adds to the literature. It helps guide some of the prospective work. But it's those true prospective studies that are going to give us the more definitive answers that we need.
What do you think surrounding the student-athlete dialogue? I'm not talking about what researchers are referring to this kind of concussion stigmatism like, but from a student-athlete perspective, athletic trainers, team support staff, do you think they're handling concussions correctly?
I think people are largely handling it the best that they know how to handle it at this point in time. And I say that because science evolves and medicine evolves. And so if you were to look back at the early 2000s when we were returning people the same day that they had a diagnosed injury because they cleared on symptoms, that's barbaric by today's standards, but that was the norm back then. And so fast forward 20 years from now, there are things that we're doing today that science is later going to prove it was good or bad. And we're going to look back at 2023 and go like, what were they thinking? And that's just the nature of science and medicine, is it just evolves and changes.
Do you think that this study topics, because you're looking at such a wide progression of disease, that kind of disease progression will translate differently because you're looking at improvements in research?
Yeah. So if I understand your question, I think you're asking is how we manage people today, because that's different than how we did it 20 or 30 years ago. Does that affect how people are going to be 50 or 60 years from now? Yeah.
Yes.
So, I mean, I will speculate on this, but I would speculate probably only because I'll use ACL as it's a good example. So ACL surgeries, I'll say trying to get my timelines here, but let's just say in the 1980s, they would do the surgery and then they would cast people. And for, I don't know the length of time, but they would literally put people into cast and immobilize them. And what they found was people would lose terminal extension, and then that would impact their gait for life and they would lose muscle tone and a bunch of other things. And so what they then realized was like, oh, we need to let people move more freely. And then so they kind of didn't put people into braces. And then now I'm a long time out of clinical care, at least especially for ACL injuries, but you're moving somebody almost the day of surgery. Like they come out of the OR and the recovery room and you're like, okay, time to go on continuous passive movement. And that evolution has helped the way people recover, down the road. And so my guess is that as we understand concussion, the nature of the injury, the management of the injury, and the recovery of the injury, we will develop better techniques that will then help people down the line. That's my guess.
Do you think that the current dialogue surrounding CTE is helping or hurting this process?
I think it's a mixed bag, to be honest. So I think on the helping side, the current dialogue has brought a lot of attention to the injury, which brings a lot of research dollars, which helps us answer the questions that are being asked. So I think that's the helping side. I do get concerned about the way CTE is commonly portrayed, and sort of around this, you've had one concussion, you are now destined to have this outcome, which is clearly not the case. Or if you ever played a contact and collision sport, whether you had a concussion or not, you are destined to this outcome, which is not the case. And so I get nervous about the mental health of people that had an injury, maybe in high school or college, or just played a contact collision sport, high school, college, and the mental health that they are onboarding, the negative mental health that they're onboarding because of this media portrayal, and some of the downstream negative effects that may have.
Do you think that there is a specific sport that puts itself in harm's way, concussion wise? I mean, excluding football and hockey, soccer, because we know from research that those are high contact sports. Concussions, contact injuries are high.
Right.
What sports would surprise people to know that they have the rate of concussion that they do?
So on the international stage, rugby is a huge one. Far beyond what American football is. Probably more familiar to people in the U.S., women's volleyball is a big one. And field hockey, that's the other one, which is in the U.S. is largely a women's sport. So if you're looking for sports that like most people don't talk about, those are probably the two, at least to me, that come to mind. But you're absolutely right. Like football, men's and women's soccer, ice hockey, lacrosse, but those are all contact collision sports, so we sort of expect it on some level. But yeah, I think those two, women's volleyball and field hockey, are probably the two most people don't think about.
I can understand field hockey because it's kind of an extension of lacrosse, but why volleyball?
It's a good question. I don't know the injury mechanisms so much. I will totally speculate here, but I would say there's probably a lot of two people going for the same ball and colliding heads, or maybe somebody diving and going into the posts that hold the nets, or maybe something on the seats that are on the side. I don't know. I don't know those data that well.
Yeah, I mean, that was surprising to me listening to you say that, because I've watched a lot of sports and I don't think of volleyball as a necessarily contact collision sport like we were talking about.
Yeah, and it's not classified as a contact collision, but they do, the athletes do seem to have a higher rate than I'm just saying it's a higher rate than I think that most people think of. I'm not saying it's not on par with football and some of those sports.
Yeah. Your background is kind of a biomechanics kinesiology. What is the intersection between concussions, head trauma, and biomechanics?
Yeah. So I would say I am kinesiology, exercise science trained, and I dabble in a lot of things. So, when I took my first faculty position at Illinois, right, maybe a few years before I graduated with my doc, but right around that time, there was a company out of New Hampshire called Simbex that invented this system called the head impact telemetry system. And it's an accelerometer array that fits within a football helmet, and it allowed people to track location and magnitude of impacts. And so Kevin Guskowitz at North Carolina was using this in college athletes, and there were a few other schools around the country that were doing it. But we were the first at Illinois to use it in high school athletes. So, really, because you're first, you're really asking very simple questions, like how many times do these players get hit in a day, in a week, in a season, and what does that look like by position? So we sort of did some like real simple studies just to try to understand what exposure looked like. And then we started getting a little more complex, and it was different offense and defensive schemes and what happens when you change the contact practice rules and those types of things. But, as a kinesiologist, exercise science major, we took biomechanics classes, and through some of the work I had done at Ohio State, I took some physics classes for that matter. And a lot of physics, at least in the mechanical physics, it's just, biomechanics is just physics applied to the body in essence. I would never claim to be a biomechanist. I have a very rudimentary knowledge of it. But it was enough to at least do those simple projects that we did. And on occasion, I still draw from that part of my life and try to answer questions.
Speaking of youth sport, I was reading an article that you had been quoted in, and you didn't say this, but in part of the article, it said that youth sport concussions in the state of Michigan were decreasing. Why?
I don't know.
I think the article was written. I think the article was written in 2022-ish.
Yeah, I'd have to see the article. I'm not sure, to be quite honest. I will say that the state of Michigan changed at least at football, they changed their contact practice rules. Might have been like 2013, 2014, somewhere in that neighborhood. I don't remember exactly. Where it was unrestricted. A coach could have 5 contact practices a week, but then they limited it to 2. And I'm using 5 as an extreme. My guess is most coaches weren't doing that, but so they limited it to 2, and we were able to actually look at head impact exposure, and it drops. It dropped by I think 40% or 60%. I'm sorry, that's a big range there. I just don't remember the study results.
You're good.
But it's very clear that when you limit contact practices, you limit head impact exposures, which reduces concussion risk as a whole. So the number or the article that you're talking about may be related to football. I don't actually know that. But there have been efforts, I would say, broadly across all sport to better inform athletes and coaches and parents about risks and ways to prevent. And management is a lot better. There's really clear data that the modern management techniques actually reduce repeat concussions in the same season. So there's probably, I wouldn't want to say it's just this rule change or just this management technique. It's probably a combination of things that have happened over the years that are causing it.
That's great, though.
Yeah, not a bad thing to see. That's the type of stuff you want to see.
When you're looking at the University of Michigan athletes, I mean, we're talking Power 5, we're talking high impact, high stress. Do you see these mental health concerns playing out in real time? And are you working that closely with the athletes to even be able to monitor those kind of trends?
Yeah. So, I mean, our athletic medicine team here that deals with our athletes, which I think is approaching 1,000 student athletes on campus. I mean, they're some of the best in the country, if not the world. So, and they're the ones that are down there day to day, and they manage all the issues. My association with athletics is specific to concussion and kind of giving guidance on whether it's policy or management, or sometimes I'll get an email or asking me about a new piece of equipment. Is this good or bad, or what do I think? So I'm a little bit removed from the day-to-day that's going on. But I think I would be in safe space to say, student athletes, particularly at a high profile school, whether it's Michigan or somebody else, they're under a lot of pressure, period. Right? Let's put injury to the side, but they are just under a lot of pressure because they are full-time students. They are full-time athletes, and some of them have huge family and personal expectations of what happens next, once they're done. And, stack that on top of, you're taking somebody who's 17 or 18 years old and you're moving them to a very high profile environment. At a period of life where a lot of people are going under a lot of identity change just in general. And so it's just a lot of pressure for somebody that young. And, people are very aware of this. I'm not saying anything that's, a secret. People are very aware and are always trying to make sure that the athletes are, if they're having issues, that they're reporting it and they can get help. But we all know there's a ton of social stigma around mental health. And even to this day, I think COVID was absolutely horrible, but if it did anything, it helped kind of bring mental health to the surface. And it's a lot more palatable now to talk about it than it was even a couple of years ago.
I think it's really cool. Unbeknownst to me, until I went back and did some research on you, I brought on in episode 62 of this podcast a group from the University of Michigan called Sack the Stigma.
Hmm.
Do you know of them?
It sounds familiar, but I don't think I know anybody like with them.
Yeah. So it was an advocacy group that was aimed at using student athletes to, through the sale of merchandise like t-shirts, to combat mental health issues on campus.
Yep.
I just wanted to see if you knew of them. They were really cool. They gave a great interview. I feel like you should figure out who they are. They're
Yeah, yeah. So as
it
you're
sounded
talking
like a
through
cool
this,
initiative.
yeah, as you're talking through this, some memories are coming back. If I recall, there was a player, I think, that came up with the slogan and maybe had like one shirt made and was wearing it in the locker room. And then a couple other players were like, oh, like I want one of those. And then I think I think the whole team ended up wearing it for like pregame, or maybe a chunk of the team wore it for pregame. And then it kind of blew up from there in a good way. And, but I think it takes courageous people like that are literally in the nation's spotlight to bring it out and say like, hey, it's okay to talk about this. And, you have to be really appreciative of, like, they're putting themselves out there to do it. And that's the type of work that we need is to bring that stuff into the spotlight.
I am in the process of interviewing a group of people who are partnering through NIL to advocate for mental health. How do you think that NIL, name, image, likeness, the transfer portal has changed the conversation surrounding mental health umbrella term, but things like concussions, chronic clinical depression, anxiety disorders? How has it changed the dialogue surrounding those kind of issues?
I don't know if I have a good answer for you. I could speculate here. I think
It's good.
and I don't, and you'd have to talk to like the sport economists, the sports business people about like the nitty gritty of NIL. So I'll just give you kind of more of my layperson's understanding. But I think what NIL has done has fully empowered the athlete to be able to kind of speak up, right? Or maybe not fully empowered, but they definitely have a larger voice than they used to. And if mental health or LGBTQ rights or whatever is their passion, it gives them the ability to do that. Probably with less fear of retribution from their team. And I'm not trying to say teams are like suppressing free speech or anything like that, but when you are fully backed by, you have an NIL agreement with Coca-Cola, and I'm totally making that up, like all of a sudden, like, hey, I got a lot more backing here than I'm one person out on a limb by myself. And so I think, and NIL is in its infancy. And I think as it will evolve, I think over the next decade, and it'll kind of land and we'll kind of settle down as to like some of these agreements I'm hearing are just insane, good and bad. And so I think as that settles down, we're going to sort of see, I don't know, we'll get a little more steady state on how these things are handled. I also think what we're looking at is we have from an age cohort where my generation, older generations, like we lived the stigma, and it's still a little awkward. Like when I talk to my friends about this stuff, like still a little awkward for people to bring it up. But that age, that generation, it's far more comfortable to be kind of more of an advocate for some of these things that have been suppressed for so long.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I was doing research for another episode, and the University of Washington is using an app, and the app is giving NIL deals to 10 of their student athletes to advocate for mental health services. Yeah. And I think that it's deals like that. Like, I don't need a truck, I don't need new shoes. I need something that works and addresses this need.
Right. And there's going to be, I'm thinking of like, I don't know, there's NIL deals where the athletes, males and females, are making like millions of dollars, and I get it. But there's going to be, to your point, there's going to be NIL deals where it's like look, I'm the third string, such and such, and like I'm willing to advocate for this, you know, because that's the thing that I believe in, and I would just want to I want to get my voice heard. So
Yeah. I think that it's really interesting when you look at causes that are partnering with athletes that are not local. WVU does a ton with a local car dealership, so all of their football team gets trucks. I mean, we're not talking about partnering with Subway to do an
right.
ad. We're talking about mental health services, this dialogue that is chronically underreported anyway, to give these athletes money and a platform to talk about it, I think is really good.
Yeah. And it's, you know, I think that's a shift. It's a generational shift, like I said, and it's a societal shift too, right? But somebody's got to go first, and it's always uncomfortable, typically uncomfortable to be the first person. So it's good. It's good to see.
Can you tell me about what you guys do with Athletes Connected?
We have a loose, a very, I don't even know if I could say loose. We have talked to them, but we haven't really engaged with them in any sort of event or anything like that.
Okay. And then more pertinent to you, the director of the Concussion Center, what does your day-to-day life look like?
It depends on what's going on. So we're in summertime right now, so things are a little bit calmer. And my regular academic duties, teaching duties are on pause until the fall semester. So we spend the summer, some of it is wrapping up projects that weren't finished during the regular academic year. Some of it is more forward thinking of like, what are we going to do in the coming year or years? But it just sort of depends on like, some of it's putting out the fire or just dealing with, you know, today's tasks. And some of it's a little bit longer thinking. But I mean, broadly, I think, you know, we have a great team. We operate around 3 cores within the center. So we have a research core, an outreach core, and a clinical core. And just making sure that those cores are talking to each other, everybody knows what's going on, and we're sort of amplifying everybody's voice in a way that makes sense. And it has worked out really well for us, I think. We've grown a lot. We just started 5 years ago, you know, and we're just really excited. You know, we've grown a lot already, but we're really excited about where we're going.
And then I don't know if you can divulge this information. I don't know if this works with HIPAA or not, but with your work in the neurotrauma research lab, do you see a lot of student athletes?
Uh, yes and no. So, so for the last almost decade now, we've been running a project called the CARE Consortium that's been funded by the NCAA and the DoD. And that project, we have 30 sites across the country, and Michigan being one of them, of course. But at every site, every varsity athlete on those campuses is eligible to participate. And then we have the 4 military service academies. So in addition to the varsity athletes, all the cadets on those campuses are eligible. So at Michigan, you know, we extend the invitation to participate to all the 900 or 1,000 student athletes. And I would say we had, in any given year, 80 to 85% of people participated. And so that allows us, we do baseline evaluations, and then if there's an injury, we do 5 post-injury time points. And then we're at the stage now where we're starting to track people after they've graduated. So no violation to say that our student athletes participate. I just can't talk about any specific person.
And then when you're tracking them post-grad, what are you looking for?
Yeah, great question. So sort of the stuff that we've been talking about, we're very interested in kind of psychological and mental health. And so, you know, we started off, we had 55,000 individuals that we enrolled at this kind of like baseline while they were on campus time period. And then a subset of those, we're looking to get 7,500 of the civilians twice over a 5-year interval, and then 5,000 of the military, they're now officers, twice over that same interval. And so, we have a pretty extensive, it takes about an hour-ish to complete online surveys for satisfaction with life and mental health, anxiety, depression. We also account for alcohol use and sleep. We have an instrument called the Life Events Checklist. So it's kind of tragic events that may have happened in your life, pain scales, disability scales, other concussions you may have sustained after you left your institution. For this entire purpose of trying to understand are long-term problems a function of those that just participated in contact collision sports, or is it more equally distributed across all athletes, or is it something else that we're not thinking of? But we know we need to account for other lifestyle factors that may kind of influence these things. So, for example, we have social determinants of health. We ask those. And, there's some pretty tough questions in there about things that may have happened to you as a kid or maybe a young adult. But we know those things influence anxiety and depression, right? So we want to be able to tease out something that may be related to a concussion or head impact exposures without concussion versus something that may have happened to you as a 10-year-old that is causing those problems.
I think it's interesting that you mentioned head impact without concussion. It's easy to look at data points and say this checks all the boxes of a concussion. When you're looking at head injury without concussion, what qualifies that?
That's $1 million question that we don't really have an answer to. So I think the best we can say now is any head impact that doesn't result in clinical signs and symptoms of concussion is a head impact without concussion. But nobody knows kind of what's the floor to that. So this kind of gets back to some of the biomechanics stuff we were talking about, but it's pretty well accepted that anything below maybe 10 or 15 Gs of head acceleration is sort of routine, right? It's like the amount of jostling your head takes if you went for a run. What we don't, and then we sort of know that the average magnitude of impact that causes concussion is in the like 80 to 90 G range. And that's an average. So there's definitely a window around that. What we don't know is there a cut point in the middle that is safe, doesn't have any neurometabolic effects, and then over that is something is going on, but it doesn't result in a headache or dizziness or something else. And so I think you kind of get what I'm saying. It's like we don't know kind of what that middle zone is pretty gray to us right now. So we're sort of just including everything that falls in it.
So, for example, non-contact athletes would probably test well in that area.
Yeah, like let's say a swimmer, right? They would not have, barring a backstroker hitting their head on the wall, right, which would result in concussion. Well, may or may not result in concussion, but barring something like that, they would have no head impacts, that we would worry about. But you may, like a football player, takes a lot of head impacts that don't result in concussion. And so we want to make sure that we're trying to account for some of that stuff in our algorithms.
Awesome. We have less than a minute. I'm going to get out and get back in, and I'll see you in about 5 seconds.
Okay, sounds good.
Oh. All right, I don't see you yet.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't turn the camera on. That's okay. There you go.
All right, welcome back.
All right.
So getting back into the determinants of these ranking systems, what else are you looking at? Let's take, for example, contact collision athletes specifically. Are there kind of data points that you see more frequently?
Data points related to
head injury on a more chronic scale.
So we're still in the data collection phase. So I couldn't tell you that, this thing is or is not related to kind of the outcome variables. But right now it's sort of we're trying to collect as much as we can, and then we'll start digging into the literature, or not digging into the numbers and the analyses in a few years. So
yeah.
Yeah.
I thought that it was super interesting that the Department of Defense picked this kind of study up. Why?
So I'll take you back to 2007 when I said, the New York
Here we
Times,
go again.
yeah, put it on the front page. So if you recall, CTE and the NFL were on, there was that going on. That was the highlight of the story. But parallel to that, we were involved in 2 wars overseas, and head injury, brain trauma was the signature wound, right? So the battle armor had been improved. People were surviving IED explosions, but they were coming out with, the full spectrum of injuries, mild, moderate, and severe. So that's where the DoD interest sort of came into it. And then there was some data that came out, I think in 2012, 2013, somewhere around there, that actually showed that I think 80 or 85% of concussions in military personnel occurred in non-combat settings. So it occurred in, they do their combatives training, they do their physical fitness, they participate in sports. So all the sort of regular things that they just do on their day-to-day. So that shared interest between the NCAA and the DoD came largely from that. Sort of on top of that, at the academies, every cadet on campus has to participate in a sport of some sort. So you have the traditional varsity level athletes, but everybody else participates in either a club or a rec sport while they're there, and that's a mandated thing. The academies, the military views their cadets as athletes, and we often refer to them as the tactical athlete. So you're looking at a group of individuals that are, when I think of civilian and military, they're both 18 to 22 years old, really pushing for physical and mental excellence, and both at risk for injury. And both groups having an interest in what are the long-term effects. And, there's on the sports side, it's really easy to try to understand, like, okay, what happens to the football player or the hockey player? But very little research at that point had been done in the swimmer, the cross-country athlete, the tennis athlete, because it's such a low-risk sport. It sort of just got ignored, right? So, we were the first group to really do this all-inclusive type of study. Then on the military side, all of those cadets, or the vast majority, will become officers, and they will start leading the next round of troops. And you want to make sure that your officers are making good decisions, when they're handing out orders. So while the endpoints might be a little bit different, the interest, at least in kind of how they get there, is definitely the same.
That is, I mean, when I was looking at that, it was like the NCAA and the U.S. Department of Defense, and I was just wondering where the crossover was, but it makes perfect sense.
Yeah, and it's been a really good partnership. I think both groups have. I mean, I'm going to be a little bit flippant here, but they basically wrote us a check, and then they said, "Let us know what you find out." And we give regular updates on these are the papers that we've published and the findings from those papers, but nobody's looking over our shoulder and making suggested edits or anything like that. So it's really been a lot of fun to work with them on this project.
The number I saw was almost $43 million.
We're probably, with this last round of funding, probably around 100 at this point. So we've gone through 3 rounds, it's really it's been good. I can't complain.
What do you foresee being the outcome deadline of this research?
I think, we talked about this true prospective study, and I think we've set ourselves up to do that. And we are just in this first kind of after graduation phase of up to 10 years. So these individuals are, let's just say, I don't know, mid-20s to mid-30s, somewhere in that neighborhood. We've got another 40 years to go, maybe. My co-PI colleagues, I've said this before, and I've said this to them, so they won't cringe if they hear this, but I'm the youngest of the 4 of us, so I'm pretty sure I'm going to be last man standing and have it all at the end. We'll see. But we'll see. So.
Is it difficult to work in a field where you may not fully reap the benefits of the research that's being started?
I mean, I don't think it's about me reaping any benefits. It's about what can we do for the athletes and the military connected individuals. And so we've published, I think, close to 150 papers already, and those have influenced NCAA policy. I'm part of an international group on concussion. and it helped inform some of the decisions that they made at a meeting last fall. It helped myself and my colleagues. We're on policy statements regularly. I don't want to say a lot, but regularly. And that work all helps inform those documents, including the DoD guidelines around concussion management and care. So I think we're already seeing the benefits kind of play out. But unless I get a concussion, I don't get the direct benefit. It's all about the other people.
I saw that your research has been cited almost 20,000 times, according to Google. How does it feel to have that many educated individuals publishing research and studies and elevating what you've already put in place? I mean, feel free to answer this as narcissistically as
no,
you.
not at all. First of all, I didn't know that, so thanks for sharing. And then now I'm trying to figure out how to crawl under this desk and hide. So I don't know, flattered, I guess. Wow. I don't know. I mean, I just we were talking before this started. I'm just like a kid that grew up in West Virginia. I'm just doing my thing, and that's okay. So yeah, it's nice. I won't lie. It's nice to hear, but I did not know that until just now.
Yeah, I was looking at the recent research that you've put out, and Google on the sidebar had that research with your name attached to it has been cited 20,000, almost 20,000 times.
Well, that's nice to hear. Thank you for letting me know.
So. Yeah, I thought that was, I didn't know if you knew that, but that's really impressive.
Okay, I do now. So
anything that you think that I missed? Anything that you would like to talk about?
I think I often get the question, like, should my kid play this sport or that sport, and would you let your kid play this or that? And I think that is a very individualized question. And I say that because, so for example, like my nephew, who just graduated high school, but when he was younger, had expressed interest in playing football. And so my sister-in-law asked, like, what do you think? And I just said, I actually wouldn't be worried so much about concussion for him. I think what I would be worried about is orthopedic injury. And I said that because, he was very small for his age, both in height and in weight. And I'm like, I don't remember exactly how tall he was, but if he was 5 foot and 100 pounds, and he's going to go up against some kid that's going to go play D1 next year, who's 6'2", 220, like he's just going to break a bone. And I think those types, I think parents just need to sort of think kind of what's best for the kid. And that's, is this kid the right size and shape and have the right coordination to play this sport that they're interested in? And then if that answer is yes, then I think the next question is, who's the coach? Like, how do they coach? Like, are they well qualified to coach my child? And I've used this example a lot, but I've been in situations where we're doing research at a high school level, and they go through 2 or 3 days of kind of the heat of acclimatization, and then they go and start doing contact, and it is literally line up from the man across from you, and on the whistle, hit them. And that's the extent of how tackling was taught. And I remember turning to a student that was working with me. I'm like, dial 911 and get ready. And fortunately, nothing happened. But, it's sort of like, that's the sort of thing as a parent, I think you should be on the lookout for. And then the third thing I would look out for is, what's the concussion plan? Is there an athletic trainer available? Kind of what is available on site if something does happen? If you're going to let your child participate in a contact and collision sport, or all sport for that matter, like injuries are going to happen. It's just inevitable. And I'm a huge advocate for sport. There are so many benefits, both physical and mental and social. But that's part of the risk. There's risk of walking to work or driving your car to work. We just assume risk in life. So I would make sure that those things are in place, and that, that it's the right thing for your kid. The coaches have the right training and have the right mindset. And then if something happens, that there's the ability to take care of that injury pretty quickly.
Working off of that last point, do you think that if not the head coach, someone on the coaching staff should be certified in concussion, just kind of what to look out for?
Yeah, so every state in the United States has a concussion law, and there's some variance from state to state, but they largely mandate concussion training for coaches and people affiliated with the sport, so administrators. Um, and that has been actually very good broadly. It's raised a lot of awareness. But coaches, the primary job of the coach is to coach the team and to win games. So, and I'm not trying to imply that coaches would willfully put somebody back in that's injured, but they are not specialists in concussion care. And so, or in just athletic injuries. So I think, if you could, somebody that is a little more directed, to athletic injuries, I think that's going to be a better bet for a team.
And then do you think that in the grand scheme of youth sport to potentially professional level, when do you think that we should start talking about concussion regulation, head injuries? I mean, I don't know if you know, but there's a youth athlete nicknamed Baby Gronk right now.
I think
And
I saw a headline. I know nothing about this kid, but I think I saw it.
yeah, he's in somewhere in elementary or middle school, and he's starting to play football, and his dad is going bananas trying to get him as ready for high school sports as humanly possible. And that includes preparing him to get hit. And his dad is going kind of crazy on the front end. I mean, he's going on talk shows. He is trying to publicize the living daylights out of his child in an effort to get looks from college coaches. But in doing that, he also sets his child up for things like head injuries prematurely.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's ever too early to have any conversation as long as it's age appropriate. And I know that I live in the concussion world, but um, I've been talking to my kid about it since probably before she could understand words. So, and she played soccer a little bit, and she had to acknowledge, read the form and acknowledge, and et cetera, et cetera. But so I don't think you can talk about it too early. I think as soon as your kids are starting to participate, I think that's something you should, talk to them about. Along with other injuries, right? Like you might sprain your ankle, you might hurt your knee, you just need to use age appropriate language. And then probably as, the parents or the guardians should kind of have the conversation of, when are we not comfortable with this anymore? Right. Okay. Well, one is okay. And totally making this up. One is okay. Two is not. Two is okay. Three is not. And that's a different threshold for every parent. So, and listen to the kid. I think, I don't want to comment on like baby Gronk here, but there's definitely a lot of stories where athletes are doing it because they started off and they loved it, but then it got to the point where they don't want to love it anymore, but they don't want to quit because they don't want to let friends and family down. And, I think the kid needs to have a voice in this too. And if they're done at whatever, they're getting looks to go to D1 schools, but they're kind of done with it, then they should have a right to say, like, I'm done and be able to walk away.
There is this kind of rush of youth sport specialization, specifically in sports that peak earlier, like gymnastics. But we're also playing tackle football at 10, 11, 12. Are you currently researching that demographic that has
Uh,
started and stayed specifically in tackle contact sports?
yeah. So I'm not looking at youth sports specialization. I have some friends of mine that do that work. So I don't want to speak for them, but I think safe to say at a high level, kids that specialize at younger ages are more likely to be injured and more likely to drop out of sport altogether. And they're more likely to be injured because they're only doing one motor pattern, like from a young age, and they don't develop kind of full body awareness and movement. And then they get burned out and then they drop out. So, I think, I can't remember who it was, trying to remember which football coach it was, because like I recruit athletes. Like I actually want high school kids to play multiple sports. Like I can teach the game of football, but if I have a kid that's just a good athlete, I can't teach that. So there's a lot of advantage to playing multiple sports and developing different movement patterns and comfort with those patterns that carry over. And not for nothing, outside of the rare, 0.5% of the population or 0.5% of football players that go on to play in the league, like everybody's done after college, if not high school, and you still got a lot of life to live and a lot of other times that you can be moving around. So maybe finding a couple sports to play can help you out longer.
Yeah. I think that I end up talking almost like clockwork about athlete identity in every single one of these podcast episodes. Who are you without your sport? Whether you age out of it, whether you get injured, some kind of career-ending injury, what happens after you're done with your sport? And if you're left with implications like serious head trauma, what's the next step?
Yeah. And I think, so athlete identity, I'm glad you brought that up. So that's another thing that we're trying to capture in our study is athlete identity. And so sort of this idea of like the stronger they identify of being an athlete, then once they're done with the sport, then the odds of, we sort of feel like depression, anxiety might be higher. Depression in particular might be higher because, it's gone and that type of thing. And sport is fickle. Very few people get to end sport on their own terms, right? Like the Troy Aikmans and the Steve Youngs and the people that self-select out is pretty rare actually. Most people are cut from a team or at the professional level, they're cut from a team or injured or something happens and they're just gone. And so and identity, the psychology of identity, like you don't flip a switch yesterday, today, and like, oh, I was a football player yesterday and today I'm a civilian. And, it takes time to kind of rediscover who you are and form that new identity. Some people handle that fine and some people don't. And, we have some reason to believe that some athletes that, I'll just say had the rug pulled out from underneath them, but were cut from a team, maybe that's what causes severe depression. It's not only loss of identity, but it's loss of income. You really don't know who your friends are anymore because prior to that, everybody just wanted to be around you because you were a pro athlete. So there's all sorts of kind of psychology that comes into this on top of maybe you had a concussion or 2 or 3 or, head impact exposure. So it is not, I'm very comfortable saying it's not going to be you played a contact collision sport and had a concussion and therefore you're going to have problems. My guess is that's part of the equation, but it's not going to be a 1-to-1 correlation.
Anything else that you would like to go over? Any questions you have? I'm done with mine. I'm going to turn the table over to you.
No, I think this has been great. I appreciate great questions. You
Thanks for coming on.
Clearly did your homework and had some really cool questions. So this is neat. I appreciate it.
I'm going to look up when your podcast episode will come out. I believe off the top of my head, it's somewhere in the middle of August.
Okay.
Get you that number as soon as this loads. And then if anything changes for you or the research that you're doing, or if anything new is published in the time between now and then, just send me an email, send me a DM on LinkedIn, and I'll get the script updated for you. Okay. Yes, your podcast episode will be out on 8/16, so August 16th. It'll be on Apple, Spotify, SoundCloud, Amazon, Audible, iHeartMusic.
Got it all, man.
And then obviously on Instagram and Twitter as well.
Okay. That's good.
You'll be tagged in everything, and once it's published, I will send you the link to disperse as you would like.
Yeah, I was gonna say, if you can let me know, then I can send it out through our channels. And we're happy to do that. The one thing you asked about Athletes Connected, which sort of bobbled that answer. So maybe, and there was no answer really there. So if you can maybe slice that one out, that would be great.
Yeah, no, you're good. Not every answer is a home run,
That was a swing and a miss.
Yeah, but if anything else comes out that you want included, if something happens on the University of Michigan's campus, anything interesting in your research that you can divulge, just send me a message and I'll update it.
Okay.
But
sounds good.
If nothing else, thank you so much for coming on and talking to me. I'm excited to put your episode together. It's going to be really cool.
Thanks, Julia. This is great. You did a great job. Seriously.
Thank you.
Done a few of these. They're pretty tough, and not tough as in hard questions, just like pulling teeth tough. So
yeah,
you did a great job.
Thank you. I'll talk to you in August.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks. Take care.
Bye.